Ever feel like modern life is just too civilized? Then maybe it's time to reconnect with your inner wild man. Introducing Wild Man Wilderness Retreats. The only getaway where personal growth isn't optional. Because we accidentally left you in the forest. Tired of motivational speakers? Our mentor hasn't spoken to society in centuries. Need a confidence boost? We'll hand you a mysterious task with almost no instructions. Then quietly watch you figure it out. Feeling stressed? Excellent. Stress builds character. Probably. Forget luxury resorts. We've got trees. Forget room service. We've got berries. Forget Wi-Fi. We've got complete emotional isolation. At Wild Man Wilderness Retreats, you'll enjoy long walks through ancient forests, cryptic advice from an unusually hairy life coach, several deeply symbolic experiences you won't understand until years later, and enough self-discovery to make your therapist very, very interested. Still not convinced? Ask one of our former guests. I came here looking for my golden ball. I left with emotional maturity. Honestly, I would have preferred the ball. So stop wasting money on expensive self-help seminars. Get lost in the woods instead. It's cheaper. Probably. Wild Man Wilderness Retreats TAM, where midlife crises become legendary since approximately the Middle Ages. Disclaimer. Wild Man Wilderness Retreats, TM, assumes no responsibility for mysterious forest guides, accidental character development, symbolic life journeys, golden hair, enchanted springs, unexpected maturity, archetypal awakenings, medieval royalty, emotional breakthroughs, or the uncomfortable realization that the weird hairy guy was making more sense than your last 3 managers. Wild Man Wilderness Retreats TM. Find yourself. Or at least figure out where you left your golden ball.
Disclaimer. Welcome to the Pizzaverse. Before somebody sprints into the comments convinced we're about to reveal that a hairy forest man is still wandering around Germany, handing out life advice, let's get one thing straight. This documentary explores the history, folklore, mythology, and psychology surrounding Iron Hands, a fairy tale collected by the brothers Grimm. We'll also examine how later scholars and psychologists interpreted the story over the centuries. That means we'll be discussing medieval legends, historical context, mythology, symbolism, and psychological theories. It does not mean we're claiming every interpretation is historical fact. We'll separate documented history from folklore from symbolism, and symbolism from modern analysis. Sometimes those lines are crystal clear. Sometimes they're about as organized as medieval record keeping. If your favorite internet guru insists Iron Hands was definitely an alien, a time traveler, Bigfoot's cousin, or the guy who invented therapy after wrestling a bear, that's between them and their comments section. Here in the Pizzaverse, we follow the evidence. Sometimes the evidence leads to history. Sometimes it leads to mythology. Sometimes it leads to psychology. And sometimes it leads to realizing people have been trying to figure themselves out for thousands of years without the benefit of Wi-Fi. So grab an espresso, silence your inner internet expert for a little while, and join us as we explore one of the strangest, oldest, and most influential fairy tales ever told. Now let's get into it.
Iron Hands. The forgotten fairy tale that inspired modern psychology. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Every generation grows up with fairy tales. Stories about brave princes, beautiful princesses, wicked witches, magic mirrors, and happily ever afters. They're the stories we tell children before bed. The stories we remember long after we've forgotten who first told them. But every now and then, hidden among those familiar tales, there is one that doesn't quite belong. A story with no fairy godmother. No glass slipper. No kiss that breaks the spell. Instead, it begins with a cage. Inside that cage waits a creature so frightening that kings cannot control him. Hunters cannot kill him. And ordinary people refuse to speak his name. His name is Iron Hands. To many readers today, it is one of the least remembered stories collected by the brothers Grimm. It rarely appears in children's books. Hollywood has largely ignored it. And unlike Cinderella or Snow White, most people have never even heard of it. Which is strange. Because over the last century, Iron Hands has quietly become one of the most influential fairy tales ever written. Not because of magic, but because of what it says about becoming human. Psychologists, historians, mythologists, philosophers, and writers have all returned to this strange little story searching for answers. Why does a wild man live in a cage? Why is a child the one who sets him free? Why does nearly every challenge in the story force the young prince to lose something before he gains anything? And why did one of the founders of modern psychology believe this forgotten fairy tale contained timeless truths about the human mind? To answer those questions, we have to travel back. Not simply to the 19th century when the brothers Grimm wrote down the tale, but much farther. Back into Europe's ancient forests, into Germanic mythology, into a world where the wilderness wasn't simply a place. It was a force. A place where civilization ended, and something older, far stranger, waited in the shadows. This is the forgotten fairy tale that refused to stay buried. This is Iron Hands, the fairy tale everyone forgot. Think about the last time someone asked you to name a fairy tale. Chances are, you thought of Cinderella, Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, maybe Beauty and the Beast. Those stories have become part of our culture. They're retold in movies, books, television, theme parks, and countless bedtime stories. Iron Hands? Not so much. Outside of folklore enthusiasts and psychology students, most people have never heard the name. And yet, among scholars, Iron Hands is often considered one of the brothers Grimm's richest and most symbolic tales. So why did it fade into the background? Part of the answer lies in the story itself. Unlike many fairy tales, Iron Hands isn't driven by romance. There's no wicked stepmother plotting revenge. No enchanted castle waiting to be restored. No prince searching for true love. Instead, the story follows a child who slowly learns what it means to become an adult. That may not sound unusual today, but for centuries, fairy tales weren't just entertainment. They were instruction manuals. Long before psychologists wrote textbooks. Long before self-help books lined store shelves. People passed down lessons through stories. Stories taught children how to recognize danger, how to survive, how to grow, how to face fear. Iron Hands belongs to that tradition. It's less concerned with magical creatures than with personal transformation. Its monster isn't simply something to defeat. It's something to understand. That's one reason the tale feels so different from the fairy tales most people know. Another reason is timing. When the Brothers Grimm published children's and household tales in the early 19th century, they weren't trying to invent fairy tales. They were preserving stories that had circulated across German-speaking Europe for generations. Some of those stories became international sensations. Others quietly remained in the shadows. Iron Hands was one of them. Its symbolism was dense. Its message was subtle. And unlike stories featuring wicked queens or enchanted slippers, it couldn't easily be turned into light entertainment. Even today, ask 10 people to summarize Cinderella. Most can do it. Ask those same 10 people about Iron Hands. You'll probably get 10 blank stares, which makes its influence even more remarkable. Because while the general public forgot it, scholars never did. Neither did historians. And eventually, neither did psychologists. As they looked beneath the surface, they began asking a fascinating question. What if this wasn't merely the story of a wild man? What if it was the story of every one of us? To answer that, we first have to meet the mysterious figure at the center of the legend. The creature who terrified an entire kingdom before changing the life of a single boy forever. Meet the wild man. Every great fairy tale has a villain, a dragon, a witch, a giant, someone the hero must defeat. Iron Hands is different. Its most frightening character may also be its greatest teacher. The story begins in a kingdom overshadowed by fear. Just beyond the edge of civilization lay a vast forest. Dense, ancient, and almost impossible to cross. Hunters entered those woods, but many never returned. Some disappeared without a trace. Others stumbled back days later, terrified, unable to explain what they had seen. The king grew impatient. Game animals were vanishing. His hunters were vanishing. Whatever lived in that forest had become more than a rumor. So he ordered a larger expedition. This time, they returned with something extraordinary. Dragged from the depths of the wilderness, bound in chains, was a strange, powerful figure unlike anything anyone had ever seen. He wasn't an animal. He wasn't entirely civilized either. His skin and hair were covered in thick, rust-colored strands that shimmered like weathered iron. His eyes were calm, watchful, almost ancient. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply looked at the crowd, as though he'd seen kingdoms rise and fall before. The people were horrified. Naturally. Human beings have always been suspicious of anything they don't understand. Give us something unusual, and our first instinct is usually to build a cage around it. So that's exactly what they did. The king ordered the wild man locked inside a heavy iron cage in the palace courtyard. Day after day, people gathered to stare. Children whispered stories. Adults invented terrifying rumors. Some believed he was a monster. Others thought he was cursed. Some claimed he possessed magical powers. Nobody asked the obvious question: what if they were looking at him the wrong way? Because throughout history, the wild man appears again and again. In medieval art, in church carvings, in European folklore. He's often shown covered in hair, carrying a club, living deep within the forest, standing halfway between civilization and nature. To medieval Europeans, the wilderness wasn't merely dangerous. It represented everything beyond human control. Storms, animals, death, chaos, mystery. The wild man embodied all of it. He was the forest, given human form. But he also represented something else, something much closer to home. The untamed parts of ourselves, our instincts, our fears, our anger, our courage. Everything civilization tries to polish away. Centuries later, psychologists would call this the unconscious, the shadow, the hidden self. But long before those words existed, storytellers had already created Iron Hands, not as a demon, not as a villain, but as a living symbol of the parts of humanity we lock away because they make us uncomfortable. The irony is almost impossible to miss. The kingdom believed the cage was protecting them, when in reality, it may have been imprisoning the very wisdom they needed most. And while every adult kept a safe distance, one young prince couldn't stop asking questions. Children have a habit adults often lose: curiosity. Where others saw a monster, the prince saw a mystery. And before long, one simple conversation, one forgotten key, would unlock far more than an iron cage. It would begin a journey that would change the boy forever. The boy who opened the cage. History has a peculiar habit of changing because someone asks a simple question. What if? What if the Earth isn't the center of the universe? What if the king is wrong? What if the monster isn't a monster? In the story of Iron Hans, that question belongs to a child. The young prince grew up inside the palace walls. Unlike the adults around him, he hadn't spent years convincing himself he understood the world. He wasn't interested in fear. He was interested in answers. Day after day, he wandered into the courtyard. Not to mock the wild man. Not to throw stones. Not to prove his bravery. Simply to look. The prisoner never shouted, never pleaded for freedom, never threatened revenge. Instead, he watched, patiently, almost as though he already knew how the story would end. One afternoon, while the prince played nearby with his favorite possession, a golden ball, it bounced across the courtyard, rolled beneath the iron cage, and came to rest beyond the reach of his small hands. He stretched, reached, tried again. Nothing. The ball remained just out of reach. Then, for the first time, the wild man spoke. His voice wasn't filled with rage. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't the roar of a beast. It was calm. If you unlock the cage, I'll give it back. The prince hesitated. Every adult he'd ever known had warned him about this creature. The king had ordered him imprisoned. The soldiers guarded him constantly. The entire kingdom feared him. Surely, there had to be a reason. The boy returned to his father and asked for the key. The king refused. Absolutely not. The cage would remain locked. End of discussion. Most children would have given up. But fairy tales rarely reward obedience alone. The prince searched the palace. Eventually, he discovered where the key had been hidden. Some versions of the tales say it rested beneath the queen's pillow. Others simply describe it as carefully concealed within the royal chambers. Either way, the message is the same. The key was never truly lost. It had merely been hidden. The prince returned to the courtyard, heart pounding, hands trembling. He placed the key into the lock. One turn, then another. The heavy iron door swung open. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The wild man stepped forward. The guards were nowhere to be seen. The courtyard fell silent. The prince had every reason to believe this would be the end. Instead, Iron Hands bent down, picked up the golden ball, placed it gently into the boy's hands. Then he spoke words that would shape everything that followed. "You have set me free. Now you must come with me." It is one of the most remarkable moments in all of folklore. The child expects punishment. Instead, he receives an invitation. The kingdom sees a criminal escaping. The wild man sees a student ready to begin. Modern readers often miss how radical this scene really is. Most stories teach us to destroy the unknown. Iron Hands teaches something else entirely. Sometimes, growth begins the moment we unlock the very door we've been taught never to touch. The prince looks back toward the palace, toward comfort, toward safety, toward the only life he has ever known. Then, he turns toward the forest, toward uncertainty, toward fear, toward the wild man. Without realizing it, he has just taken the first real step into adulthood, and the forest has been waiting for him all along. The golden ball and the price of growing up. The moment the prince disappears into the forest, the fairy tale changes. This is no longer a story about escaping danger. It's about becoming someone new. The palace fades into the distance. The roads disappear. The sounds of civilization give way to birds, wind, and towering trees that seem older than memory itself. For the first time in his life, the prince is completely alone. Well, almost. Walking beside him is the very creature everyone else feared. Not as a captor, not as an executioner, but as a guide. It's a role that appears throughout mythology. A mysterious figure arrives, leads the hero away from the familiar, then begins teaching lessons that cannot be learned inside the safety of home. Think about it. No one becomes an adult without leaving something behind. Eventually, everyone leaves home. Everyone faces disappointment. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone discovers the world is far more complicated than they imagined as a child. Iron Hands doesn't skip those uncomfortable truths. It embraces them. Deep within the forest, the wild man brings the prince to a hidden spring. The water is unlike anything the boy has ever seen. Crystal clear. Perfectly still. Iron Hands gives him a simple responsibility. Guard this well. Do not let anything fall into it. That's all. No impossible quest, no dragon to slay, no magical sword to recover. Just one simple task. Which, of course, turns out not to be so simple. One day, the prince accidentally dips his finger into the water. When he pulls it back out, it has turned to pure gold. Startled, he tries to hide what happened. Iron Hands notices immediately. He forgives the mistake, but gives him another chance. The lesson isn't over. Later, the prince accidentally lets a strand of his hair touch the spring. It too becomes brilliant gold. Again, he hides it beneath his cap. Again, Iron Hands knows the truth. Finally, the entire head of golden hair is revealed. The task has failed. 3 opportunities, 3 mistakes, 3 moments where honesty would have mattered more than perfection. If you've watched enough fairy tales, you'll recognize that number. 3 isn't random. It appears everywhere. 3 wishes, 3 brothers, 3 trials, 3 doors, 3 chances. Across European folklore, it represents completion, transformation, a journey reaching its turning point. Iron Hans isn't angry, he's disappointed. There's a difference. He tells the boy he can no longer remain in the forest, not because he's worthless, not because he's beyond redemption, but because some lessons can only be learned through experience. So the prince leaves, not as the child who entered the woods, but not yet the man he is destined to become. The golden hair remains hidden beneath his cap, a visible reminder that something inside him has already changed. And that's where this story quietly becomes remarkable. Most fairy tales reward flawless heroes. Iron Hans does the opposite. Its hero fails. Repeatedly. He disobeys, he hides the truth. He loses what was entrusted to him. Yet the story never suggests his journey is over. In fact, it's only beginning. Because maturity isn't born from never making mistakes. It's born from what we do after we make them. Centuries later, psychologists would point to moments like these and argue that growth doesn't happen when life is easy. It happens when our failures force us to confront who we really are. The prince leaves the forest carrying no treasure, no crown, no victory, only a secret hidden beneath his cap, and a future he cannot yet imagine. Soon, he will enter a kingdom that knows nothing about his past. There, the forgotten prince will become a servant, and the greatest lessons of his life will still lie ahead. The brothers, Grimm and the ancient roots of Iron Hans. By now, the story has all the ingredients of a classic fairy tale. A mysterious guide, a journey into the wilderness, a series of tests, a young hero who must earn his place in the world. But here's the twist. The brothers Grimm didn't invent any of it. In fact, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm would probably be the first people to tell you that. When they published children's and household tales in the early 19th century, their goal wasn't to create new stories. It was to preserve old ones. Stories that had traveled from village to village, around fireplaces, across marketplaces, and through generations of storytellers long before anyone thought to write them down. Iron Hans was one of those stories. The Grimms heard different versions. Some were longer. Some were shorter. Some changed details. But the heart of the tale remained remarkably consistent. A wild man. A child. The forest. A journey toward maturity. That consistency tells historians something important. This wasn't just a story. It was part of a much older tradition. One that stretched far beyond 19th century Germany. In medieval Europe, the image of the wild man appeared everywhere. Stone carvings, churches, castle walls, ancient tapestries, illuminated manuscripts. He was often shown covered in leaves or hair, carrying a club, standing at the edge of the civilized world. To modern eyes, he can look like a monster. To medieval Europeans, he represented something much more complicated. Nature itself. Untamed. Powerful. dangerous, necessary. The wild man wasn't always evil. Sometimes he protected sacred places. Sometimes he challenged arrogant kings. Sometimes he became a teacher. And occasionally, he reminded people that civilization was only a very thin layer covering humanity's older instincts. Historians still debate exactly where the figure originated. Some trace him to medieval folklore. Others see echoes of much older Germanic traditions. Still others point toward even earlier European myths involving forest spirits, guardian figures, and supernatural beings connected to the wilderness. There isn't one universally accepted answer, and that's part of what makes Iron Hands so fascinating. It's less like a single story, and more like a river, fed by countless streams over hundreds of years. Every generation added something. Every storyteller left a fingerprint. Until eventually, the brothers Grimm preserved the version most of us know today. Ironically, the very thing that made the Grimms famous also created a misunderstanding. People often imagine they were writing children's books. Not exactly. The earliest editions of their collection contained violence, death, cruelty, religious symbolism, and complicated moral lessons that were aimed as much at adults as children. Many of the stories were softened in later editions. Others were rewritten by publishers. Still more were transformed by filmmakers. By the time most of us encountered these tales, their rough edges had been carefully sanded away. Iron Hans escaped much of that transformation. Perhaps because it was never as commercially popular as Cinderella or Snow White. Or perhaps because its lessons were simply too difficult to simplify. After all, how do you turn a story about failure, responsibility, the unconscious mind, and becoming an adult into a fairy tale filled with catchy songs? Some stories refuse to fit inside a neat little box. Iron Hands is one of them. And that may be exactly why, more than a century after the brothers Grimm wrote it down, a Swiss psychiatrist would stumble across this forgotten tale and see something almost everyone else had missed. Not just folklore, not just mythology, but a blueprint for understanding the human mind itself. Carl Jung, The Shadow and the Wild Man. By the early 20th century, most people viewed fairy tales as charming stories for children. Psychologists saw something different. Among them was Swiss psychiatrist. Jung spent decades studying myths, dreams, religious symbols, and folklore from cultures around the world. The more he compared them, the more he noticed something remarkable. People who had never met, who lived centuries apart, often told stories with strikingly similar patterns. Heroes left home. Wise old figures appeared. Dark forests tested travelers. Monsters guarded hidden treasures. Kings rose. Kings fell. According to Jung, these weren't coincidences. He believed human beings shared deep symbolic patterns he called archetypes, not memories passed from parent to child, but recurring images that seem to appear across cultures and throughout history. Whether or not one agrees with Jung's theory, His work has had a profound influence on psychology, literature, religion, and storytelling. One of his most famous ideas was the shadow. The shadow isn't a literal creature. It isn't a demon hiding inside every person. Instead, Jung used the term to describe the parts of ourselves we tend to ignore, repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. Anger, fear, pride, jealousy, ambition, even courage. Any part of ourselves can become part of the shadow if we pretend it doesn't exist. Ignoring those qualities doesn't make them disappear. According to Jung, it simply makes them harder to recognize. Suddenly, Iron Hands begins to look very different. The wild man isn't attacking the kingdom. The kingdom locked him away. The cage wasn't built by nature. It was built by people. That detail has fascinated generations of scholars. What if the cage represents everything society expects us to suppress? Our instincts, our emotions, our imperfections, the parts of ourselves that don't fit neatly into polite conversation. Then something extraordinary happens. The prince doesn't defeat the wild man. He frees him. From a psychological perspective, that moment can be interpreted as the beginning of self-discovery. The child stops fearing the unknown. Instead, he becomes curious. He follows it, learns from it, struggles with it, fails beside it, and slowly begins to understand himself. Notice something else. Iron Hans never solves the prince's problems for him. He offers guidance, but the choices, the failures, the consequences always belong to the prince. That's remarkably consistent with many modern approaches to personal growth. No mentor can live your life for you. No teacher can make your decisions. No book can eliminate failure. Growth has to be lived, not borrowed. Now, it's important to keep one distinction clear. The brothers Grimm did not write Iron Hands as a psychology textbook, nor did they claim the tale was secretly about Jung's theories. Jung's interpretation came more than a century later. His work represents one way of understanding the story, not the only way. Historians, folklorists, literary scholars, and psychologists continue to debate these ideas today. And that's perfectly healthy. Good stories invite discussion. Great stories survive it. Whether you see Iron Hands as mythology, as folklore, as literature, or as psychology, its central question remains surprisingly modern. What happens when we spend our lives running from parts of ourselves instead of learning to understand them? Perhaps that's why this forgotten fairy tale continues to resonate. Not because it provides easy answers, but because it asks difficult questions. Next, we'll meet the writer who took Jung's ideas, placed Iron Hands back into the cultural spotlight, and introduced this ancient wild man to an entirely new generation. Robert Bly and the Fairy Tale That Returned. For much of the 20th century, Iron Hands remained a story known mostly to folklorists. Then, in 1990, an American poet named Change That. Bly published a book called Iron John. The title came from another English translation of the same Grimm fairy tale. The book became an international bestseller. Suddenly, a story that had spent generations hidden in the shadows was being discussed in bookstores, universities, counseling offices, and living rooms around the world. Why? Because Bly believed modern society had forgotten something important. He argued that many people reached adulthood physically, but never experienced a meaningful transition into emotional maturity. According to Bly, ancient cultures often marked the journey from childhood into adulthood with rituals. There were mentors, tests, responsibilities, moments that forced young people to confront fear, failure, and accountability. Modern life, he suggested, often skips those rituals, whether people agree with Bly's conclusions or not. His work sparked enormous conversations. Supporters praised the book for encouraging responsibility, emotional honesty, and mentorship. Critics argued that some of his ideas were too broad, too symbolic, or relied too heavily on mythology. Both reactions helped make the discussion even bigger. And through it all, Iron Hands was suddenly back, not as a forgotten fairy tale, but as a cultural conversation. One of Bly's central observations echoes the Grimm story itself. The prince doesn't become a man because someone hands him a crown. He becomes a man because he experiences hardship. He leaves home. He loses comfort. He accepts responsibility. He works. He fails. He learns. The crown comes later. That's a lesson that extends far beyond fairy tales. History rarely remembers people for the easy moments. It remembers what they did when life became difficult. Another detail often overlooked: the wild man never asks the prince to become someone else. He simply challenges him to become who he is capable of being. That's a subtle but powerful distinction. Growth isn't about pretending to be perfect. It's about becoming more honest, more disciplined, more compassionate, more resilient. Whether you interpret Iron Hands through folklore, history, psychology, or literature, the message remains surprisingly consistent. Real transformation isn't comfortable. It almost never happens inside the safety of the palace. It happens in the forest, in the uncertainty, in the moments when we don't yet know who we're becoming. And perhaps that's why this ancient story still speaks to modern audiences. Not because it tells us exactly what to think, but because it reminds us that every generation must eventually leave the palace, walk into the unknown, and discover its own path. In the final chapter, we'll step back from the fairy tale itself and ask the biggest question of all. Why has Iron Hands survived for centuries, while so many other stories have quietly disappeared into history? Why Iron Hands still matters, More than 200 years have passed since the brothers Grimm published their version of Iron Hans. The story itself is much older, yet somehow it refuses to disappear. Not because it's the most exciting fairy tale, not because it has the happiest ending, and certainly not because Hollywood turned it into the next animated blockbuster. Iron Hands survives because it speaks to something timeless. Every generation must eventually face the same question. Who am I? When no one else is telling me who to be. That's the journey at the heart of this tale. The palace represents comfort, rules, expectations. The place where life is predictable. The forest represents uncertainty, risk, discovery. The place where genuine growth begins. Most of us spend our lives moving between those two worlds. We seek security, but we're shaped by challenge. We crave certainty. Yet we often learn the most when certainty disappears. Iron Hands never promises an easy path. It never suggests that wisdom comes without failure. In fact, the prince fails repeatedly. He loses opportunities. He makes poor decisions. He hides the truth. And still, the story doesn't define him by his worst moments. Instead, it asks what he learns from them. That's one reason the tale continues to resonate. It reminds us that failure isn't necessarily the opposite of growth. Sometimes, failure is the doorway to it. Of course, not everyone agrees on what Iron Hands means. Folklorists often see it as a preserved piece of German oral tradition. Historians examine it as a window into medieval beliefs about nature and civilization. Literary scholars analyze its symbolism and narrative structure. Psychologists explore its themes of development, identity, and transformation. None of these perspectives completely cancels out the others. In fact, they often complement one another. That's the beauty of enduring stories. They continue revealing new layers to every generation that encounters them. Perhaps the greatest irony is this. The wild man spends the beginning of the story locked inside a cage. For centuries, the fairy tale itself was trapped in one, labeled as nothing more than a children's story. Something to entertain, something to simplify, something to outgrow. But once that cage was opened, people discovered something much larger waiting inside. A meditation on identity, a reflection on responsibility, a story about mentors, about mistakes, about courage, about the difficult road from childhood to adulthood. Whether or not you agree with every modern interpretation, one fact remains undeniable. Iron Hans has inspired generations of readers, scholars, writers, and psychologists to ask deeper questions about what it means to become fully human. And perhaps that's exactly what the old storytellers intended. Not to hand us all the answers, but to give us a story worth carrying into the forest. Because every one of us, sooner or later, must walk there alone. And somewhere beyond the trees, we may discover that the wildest part of the journey was never the forest at all. It was learning to understand ourselves. Final verdict. So, did Iron Hands inspire modern psychology? Not exactly. The fairy tale existed centuries before psychology became an academic discipline. The brothers Grimm weren't writing therapy manuals. They were preserving a story that had already survived generations of oral tradition. But over time, thinkers, writers, and psychologists discovered something remarkable. They found that this forgotten fairy tale seemed to describe experiences that people still struggle with today. Growing up, leaving home, making mistakes, finding mentors, facing fear, learning responsibility, confronting the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. Whether you approach Iron Hands as folklore, history, literature, or psychology, its endurance is difficult to dismiss. Most fairy tales survive because they're entertaining. Iron Hands survives because it asks uncomfortable questions. Questions without easy answers. Questions every generation must answer for itself. Perhaps that's why it has never truly disappeared. Not because everyone remembers its name, but because people continue living its story. Every child eventually leaves the palace. Every adult eventually enters the forest. Every one of us encounters failure. Every one of us meets people who shape our journey. And every one of us must eventually decide whether we're going to spend our lives hiding behind the safety of the cage or find the courage to unlock it. The wild man was never the real mystery. The real mystery has always been us. Thank you for joining me as we explored the forgotten fairy tale that quietly influenced generations of readers, writers, and psychologists. If there's one lesson Iron Hands leaves behind, it's this. The greatest adventures rarely begin when everything is going right. They begin the moment we step into the unknown. Because sometimes, the oldest stories still know us better than we know ourselves. Fairy tales aren't just stories. They're echoes, fragments of history, pieces of mythology, reflections of the cultures that created them. Some preserve ancient fears, others preserve timeless hopes, and every now and then, one preserves a question humanity is still trying to answer. Iron Hands isn't simply a story about a wild man. It's about the long, difficult journey toward becoming the person we're capable of being. Whether you agree with every interpretation or not, its legacy continues to challenge, inspire, and provoke discussion centuries after it was first told. That's the mark of a truly enduring story.
If you enjoyed this journey into forgotten history, folklore, psychology, and the stories hiding beneath the stories, welcome to the Pizzaverse. This is where we dig beneath the surface. We don't rewrite history. We excavate it. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new investigation. And tell me down in the comments, which forgotten fairy tale should we uncover next? Because around here, every legend deserves another look. To every member of the Pizzaverse, thank you. Whether you've been here from the beginning or you just found your seat at the table today, your curiosity, your conversations, and your support make projects like this possible. I appreciate every view, every comment, every share, and every one of you who enjoys exploring history with an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism. Until next time, stay curious, question everything, and remember, sometimes the strangest stories turn out to be the ones that have been hiding in plain sight all along.
Every child knows the story. A princess, a frog, a magical kiss, and a prince living happily ever after. But here's the problem. That isn't the original story. Not even close. Long before fairy tales were polished into bedtime stories, the Frog Prince was something else entirely. A story about promises, honor, transformation, and the uncomfortable price of growing up. It begins not in a castle, but beside an ancient well. A golden ball slips beneath dark water. A mysterious creature rises from the depths, and a bargain is made. One simple promise. One promise the princess never intended to keep. But in old fairy tales, broken promises have consequences. The frog follows her home, to the palace, to the dinner table, to her bedroom door, refusing to be ignored. This wasn't a story about romance. It was a story about responsibility, about keeping your word, even when it costs you. From forgotten German folklore, to the brothers Grimm, to the ancient symbols hidden beneath the surface, we'll uncover the tale that inspired generations and discover why the oldest version is far stranger than the one most people remember. Was the frog ever meant to be a prince? Why does the story begin at a well? And what does transformation really mean? This isn't the fairy tale you grew up with. This is the story that came before. The Frog Prince. The fairy tale everyone misremembered. Coming soon. Only on the Pizzaverse.
Hello, friends. It's me, Giacomo, one star Amato A of Giacomo on the YouTube. Only bones that got made was Joe Massino's bone up the ass when I bent over and grabbed the ankles. Buy my books, please. I am begging.
The new 80s Mobster 1-star edition. Now with 73% more confusion per chapter. Do you enjoy books that leave you with more questions than answers? Do you miss the glorious days of wondering, wait, what the hell was that chapter even about? Then introducing the new 80s Mobster 1-star edition. The book that's making readers across America stare at walls in complete silence. That's right. Why settle for ordinary confusion when you can experience premium confusion? Now featuring stories that somehow get bigger every 5 pages, Enough I knew a guy energy to power a small city. Timelines that make your GPS cry. More plot detours than Jersey road construction. Gianni Cantalano. I bought this book because I wanted insight. By chapter 3, I was staring at my ceiling fan asking, am I reading a memoir or am I trapped in a side quest? Brett 52 topics. I read 2 chapters. Then my toaster looked at me with concern. Tommy Stiggs. After I finished, I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Not because I was emotional. I was trying to remember what happened. Warning. Possible side effects include excessive blinking, random confusion, looking around the room for context, whispering, hold on, go back, calling a friend at 1:30 a.m. saying, you gotta help me understand this. And now, for a limited time, every copy comes with Bambi Palermo's official review. 1 star. And that star? For effort. Because somebody had to carry the boxes. No. Wait. We're receiving updated information. Correction. That star may also be for whoever remembered to put page numbers in. Strong work. The new 80s mobster. 1 star, endless questions. Because life's too short to finish a book and immediately say, what the hell did I just experience? Pizza vs. Studios. Palermo Productions. Read responsibly. Side effects may include regret.
Hello, friends. My name is Giacomo at Giacomo A on YouTube. I made moves on the streets of New York because the X-Lax worked quickly. I made lots of sandwiches too. I was Sal Vitale's and Joe Massino's private sandwich maker. After they finished with me, I made ham sandwiches, light on the mustard. I was so good at making the sandwich, they acted like I didn't exist in the life. I want to thank Frank and Brett for helping me with my subscribers, because without them, I would still be at 1 sub. That is subscribers, not sandwich sub, which I am very good at making, like bones I make in streets of New York.
So anyway, so you put any lotion and then because without any lotion and the steak put up your ass, you're gonna damage your ass. So anyway, let's see who's there. We got a lot of guys there, which I'm very happy about that. I don't know. So okay, so let's see what I
make fun of that he's slow. 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 Make fun.
So anyway,
make fun of that he's slow. Make fun of that he's slow.
Let's see who's there. We got a lot of guys there. So anyway,
make fun of that he's slow. 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 Make fun of that he's.
I'm so high, no visine. I don't reply by, please stop typing. I'm not in the mood, don't try write me. Do I look pissed off, bitch? Cause I might be. Don't freak with me and my frequency. No decency. I got too many girls trying to freak my meat to be pressed over little Miss Mini Me. Bitch, pay me my damn respect. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. Call Taylor, I'ma need all hands on deck. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Come say something. Come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Good luck getting out alive. I don't like to famous. I didn't mean to hurt you. I heard that all my life. Bitch, I got big dreams, pipe down. Talk shit, get psyched out. Ha. Look who's on the mic now. Not you, bitch, shut the fuck up. Bitch, pay me my damn respect. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. Call Taylor, I'ma need all hands on deck. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Come say something. Come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Welcome to your funeral. Everybody come on, gather round. Life is so beautiful. Now that I don't see you around, I dare you to run your mouth. I dare you to run your mouth. I dare you to run your mouth. Bitch, I dare you to run your mouth. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Come say something. Come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch. Come say something.